Welcome to Making Sense of the Madness. We got a great show lined up for you today. The Case for Palestine, the author Dan Kovalik is going to be with us and discussing the book and much more. Then we have Paul Stone talking precious metals. You're not going to want to miss it. Buckle up and get ready to make sense of the madness. And we are back. We are joined by Dan Kovalik, the author of The Case for Palestine, Why It Matters and Why You Should Care. So this is an issue being in the alternative media the last 20 years, 20 plus, really paying attention to it. That is something that I've known about. Now, I'm currently on a pretty conservative network. So there are a lot of people that completely refuse to look at this issue. They want to call all the protesters out there pro-Hamas, etc. I certainly do not take that position. I understand, in my opinion, that Israel is going nowhere. However, the conditions that the Palestinians were under before the last year plus were absolutely horrendous, and I don't think that you could call it anything other than an open-air prison when you take a real, rational look at it. When you're looking at it, not from some religious perspective or some kind of geopolitical perspective, there is no doubt, as a human being, that's what was going on there. Now, that doesn't mean I like seeing disco kids getting shot up in some kind of a raid, right? Like, that's not what I'm about either. But I do want to see not only this conflict end, but end in a manner we don't have it again and again and again. And the Palestinian people can have their own nation state and their own political process. And I know that's a loaded opening, but how did you come at this issue and eventually write this book? And what is your current position on the situation that they are in?
Yes. So first of all, Jason, I want to thank you for having me on the show. I'm very grateful. I'm coming to you, by the way, from Beirut, Lebanon. And so the signal probably is not as good as you have in the States, but I hope we can manage. So, really, what got me deeply involved in the Palestinian issue was that I taught international human rights law at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law for 12 years. And almost every year, I had a Palestinian student from Palestine who was a international guest student in my class. And I got to be friends with a number of those students. And I really started to learn what they were going through back home. And I was ashamed that I didn't realize how terrible things were, particularly for my students who are from Gaza. That, as you said, they lived in a place, very small area, that was completely enclosed, completely controlled by Israel. They did not have control over whether they could go into Gaza or leave Gaza. Israel controlled, how much water they got, how much food, how much medicine, etc. And the more I looked into it, as you said, I realized that they were living in either what you call an open air prison or a concentration camp, truthfully. Um, Even so, the research that started me, once I was on this path, I saw that the UN, I think the United Nations, I think in 2018, predicted that Gaza would be unlivable by 2020. And that really came to pass. So people need to realize, 4 years before October, or 3 years before October 7th, Gaza was already unlivable, and not by accident, but by design. Israel decided, for example, how much food was needed per person, how many calories was needed per person, and ensured that Gaza got a little less than that, right? They destroyed freshwater aquifers, destroyed much of the infrastructure, again, even before 2023, in various attacks upon Gaza. Destroyed the one cement factory that was there so that they could not rebuild. So it was the people of Gaza were already living under terrible circumstances. The other thing people need to realize is that there were thousands of Palestinian prisoners being held by Israel before October 7th, 2023, both from the West Bank and Gaza, many of them children, many of them women, and many of them held in what is called administrative custody, meaning that they could be held even without charges. And as I mentioned in my book, Israel has the only military jails in the world for children. Let me repeat that. Israel has the only military jails in the world that they house children in.
Well, let me stop you there, because I think this is a good point for people to kind of
Yeah.
understand, because you just mentioned something really key. No charges, okay? And not only that, but women and children.
Right.
I would argue, and continue to argue, that the black sites that the United States created after the War of Terror, Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo Bay, etc., should have been shut down long ago, should have never existed, and that's now out of the conversation. So we do kind of have military prisons where you don't have to be charged. And if you look at some of the egregious war crimes that kind of came out in that 2003 to 2008 era, they had teenagers in there. There was rape going on and much worse. The very small amount that we saw was repugnant. And that's why in 2008, everybody up on the Democratic side running for president in the primaries all said they were going to shut it down. Everybody from Barack Obama to Hillary Clinton to Dennis Kucinich, who I think was actually genuine, right? All these, Joe Biden was up there too.
Yes.
They all said they were going to shut
fan.
it down.
Yeah.
And instead, it has only proliferated, and now it's not even part of the conversation. And when you look at Israel, it's not only our ally, but it's also part of Five Eyes. So their policy matters. I mean, just on a human level, obviously, all of this matters. Hopefully, you can still hear me, and it's only your video frozen up. And I'm going to throw it to you to finish up.
Yes. Yes, well, I agree with you. I mean, so first of all, I say the children in Israeli jails can be much younger than the U.S. would probably ever hold for the most part. Very young children. But you raise a good point. I mean, the more I've thought about this, and it's not just me, Israel has become an extension of the West and the United States. In many ways, and I think actually those who support Israel would agree with me on this. Israel is a beachhead of the United States in the Middle East. And so it's not surprising that what Israel does to people in prisons reflects what the U.S. does as well. In many ways, I think that Israel represents, Western hegemony. And the U.S. sees Israel as nothing but an extension of its own power. And so, yes, I think we can judge ourselves a lot by what Israel's doing. And I think that's why a lot of people were very angry at Joe Biden as president for supporting this genocide, that this genocide was as much a U.S. genocide as it was an Israeli genocide. And once you accept that, then we have a huge responsibility to stop it. So I think you're raising very important issues.
Well, Dan, again, let me just expand upon that point.
What Israel represents.
Let me just expand upon that point, because U.S. Special Forces were on the ground doing training exercises on October 7th. We have U.S. military officials that have confirmed that. They sent more U.S. special forces immediately after. We had boots on the ground via this conflict from the very beginning. Forget about the aid and,
Yes.
et cetera, et cetera. All that's there, the alliance. But we were on the ground from the very beginning of this thing, which to me is extremely suspicious. The Iron Dome doesn't seem to work. It's not like Palestine has an air force. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that people knew at least a year, maybe 2 years in advance of this plan, et cetera. So it also begs the question whether or not this was allowed to happen for this greater conflict, for that excuse, because Gaza has been leveled. I mean, even Donald Trump is acknowledging that it has been completely leveled, and that gets me into the history of this whole thing. I'm 45 years young, and probably not that politically aware in my teenage years, but enough that I was in the advanced AP studies courses. I knew on the peripheral, and I'd always hear about a two-state solution, right? Not knowing much about the Middle East. This is well before 9/11, so it's a different dynamic, and to me, obviously, the West always portrayed it as Israel's the good guys, Palestine are the bad guys, but they always said two-state solution, right? Yasser Arafat was at least in the news, etc. You don't hear that anymore. You don't hear about a two-state solution in this conflict whatsoever. And Netanyahu himself, if you followed that career now for the past few decades, very powerful man, and has openly said there is no two-state solution. Yet, again, on the peripheral, what you're hearing in the media is that's what's going to happen. What is about to happen there? And what are your thoughts on the greater Israel project? Because that's another thing that most people on the peripheral don't understand. I find it either it's the geopolitically astute or it's the ultra evangelical Christian Zionists that literally want to bring about the rapture and the end times. And that always makes me extremely hesitant. I'm not a religious guy, but I'll tell you this. The wilder the outfits get, the more worried I am. Okay? And that's all I'm going to say about any religion. So if you actually, believe this stuff and you want to bring about the end of the world, that's another whole thing. So I want you to talk about that kind of greater Israeli project again, and the future of Palestine. What it's going to be.
Yeah, well, you're first of all on the money, and you raised many very important issues. The Greater Israel Project, which many people said was a conspiracy theory, seems to actually be being carried out as we speak. And so Israel believes, Zionists who control Israel believe that Israel has the right not only over historic Palestine, which is what is called Israel right now, but also the right over Lebanon, Syria, or at least parts of Syria, Jordan, the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, and even parts of Saudi Arabia. So, and what we see right now is Israel attempting to make that a reality, right? They've already taken over parts of southern Lebanon. They've taken over the Golan Heights in Syria, and even beyond that, right? So once Assad fell, and Assad was overthrown with the connivance of Israel and the U.S. and other Western countries, Israel.
Hold on. The connivance of that, utilizing a former al-Nusra al-Qaeda proxy who was in a
Al-Qaeda.
In a government detention camp prior to this. So you're going to tell me that this doesn't have CIA, IDF written all over it. I think that you're in imagination land. We got to take a quick break. The book is The Case for Palestine, Why It Matters and Why You Should Care. We are going to be back with Dan Kovalak. After this, more Making Sense of the Madness. And we are back. So please continue, because I think this is so key. Again, the Syria situation, you looked at that, and again, if you were actually looking at it, okay, the United States is in there during the Barack Obama administration, Operation Timber Sycamore, huge upheaval, a lots of clashing. That's where ISIS really gets its foothold. the white helmets, excuses for NATO, United Nations in there. And really, when Trump comes in, it comes to a head. Russia, although, there are some conflicts with the U.S. and Russian military, go in there together, pretty much wipe out ISIS, and you only peripherally hear about Assad, right? In fact, at one point, Trump was saying we need to get out of Syria, and then all of a sudden he supposedly gassed his own people in Duma. I'd go read the OPCW reports. Doesn't seem that happened. And then Trump fires missiles. We don't hear about it. I was shocked how quickly they were able to go overtake that and basically abolish Assad to Russia. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Russia was extremely strained in Ukraine and that conflict and just said, you know what, we're pretty much done. We're going to give ground here. But that's a huge thing right now as we speak, as this is going on. And like you pointed out, the Golan Heights region was actually given to them, and I don't know how we gave it to them, wasn't ours to give, by Donald Trump. So they were able to expand right there. So that's been going on now for what? That happened 6-7 years ago? This is a long game.
Everything you're showing us, Steve, I'm looking at it going, I want one of those. I want one of those. And I think you guys are too. So don't forget to go to the Patriot TV store and you can see all of Steve's Made in America shirts and just everything. Shirts, hats, socks, sunglasses, you name it, workout gear, you've got everything.
So we're going to bring some of our other people back again to show you some of the other items.
Okay.
And we keep changing so you get a good idea of what we carry.
Yeah, I mean,
See a lot of,
exactly. Look
items.
at the variety and look at the choices you have. Today's guest again was Steve Stern of the Flag Shirt Company. And again, they've been in business over 70 years. High quality products, fast delivery, and amazing customer service. So for any reason something doesn't fit, you can send it right back. And again, I'm going to say it one more time, the Patriot TV store. You've got to go to Patriot TV store and get your item.
Continue.
Yes, well, so again, there's a lot to unpack, but I would go back to, first of all, General Wesley Clark. Remember U.S. General Wesley Clark? He was the Supreme Commander of NATO. And after 2001, he said that the U.S., he had heard, he was not part of these conversations, but he heard that from people who were privy to the conversations that the U.S. had planned after 2001 to take down 7 different countries, including Libya and Somalia and Yemen and Iraq and Syria. I've missed a couple. But,
Iran.
And then finally Iran. I think Iran was the big prize. Then in 2007, Seymour Hersh, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, wrote a piece in the New Yorker called The Redirection. And what he says is that since 2005, the U.S. had changed its decision to fight Al-Qaeda and other like terrorists, right? After 2001, remember, we were attacked by Al-Qaeda in 2001. We were going to fight a war on terror. And Seymour Hersh says, well, after 2005, they decided, no, we're going to work with Al-Qaeda and other groups like it, like ISIS, to overthrow the governments that Wesley Clark mentioned, and especially Syria. And so, as you mentioned, Obama announced sometime during his term in office that he had given authorization to overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad through this program called Operation Sycamore, which was the most expensive CIA regime change program ever in U.S. history. It cost about $1 billion a year. And what this program amounted to was supporting ISIS and a number of jihadist groups in Syria to overthrow the government of Syria. Combined with that, which cost the lives of about 500 to 600,000 people in Syria and leveled Syria, the U.S. imposed very draconian economic sanctions on Syria, which economically devastated the country. Combined with those things, the U.S. has occupied Syria, a third of Syria, for years. The one third of Syria that contains the most oil and grain, which the U.S. has been stealing. You might recall that Trump, during his first term in office, says we're in Syria to get the oil. And that was true. All of these things combined to weaken Assad to the point where, yes, this group called HTS, which is basically Al Qaeda, was able to march on Damascus with little to no resistance. And so these folks who were terrorists at the time they took over, right? At the time Jelani, this self-designated president, took over, at the time he took over, he had a $10 million bounty on his head from the U.S. State Department. But still, all of a sudden now, they're Democrats and they're the good guys that we're supposed to support.
Well, let me also say this,
Jason,
about
this
that
is,
guy, because I think that
yeah,
people really
yeah.
need to grasp this. Just somehow, some way, as soon as he got out of that prison, okay, so after he's supposedly in this re-education camp,
In Iraq.
yes, in Iraq, he hooks
Yes,
up with
yes.
al-Baghdadi almost immediately and gets 60 grand from him. So you're again telling me
Yes.
that this guy just mad, we let him go and he just goes to like the number one terrorist, gets all this money, and we're not sanctioning this. Again, this is imagination land. These are proxy networks. Obviously, if he had a $10 million bounty on his head and it was real from the State Department, his head would be in the back of a van somewhere in pieces. Someone would be collecting that.
Right.
But he is being protected. He is the next guy. And I think that does play in to the idea that whatever Israel is going to do after all these conflicts, it is expansionism. No one's talked about Lebanon other than, you on this show and myself and maybe another couple guests bring it up. But that conflict now has gone hot for over a year as well, almost immediately. I think by the end of October after the attacks, there were targeted strikes in Lebanon, no?
Yes. Almost immediately. Yes, absolutely. And people have to realize, first of all, and again, there's so much to learn here. And the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. But Lebanon used to be part of Syria. Palestine used to be part of Syria. So these are all honestly the same people, okay? And yes, right after October 7th, the war on Lebanon began as well. Very brutal war. Israel killed at least 3,500 people in Lebanon. Destroyed churches, and I need to point that out. Destroyed ancient churches, including the shrine to Saint Simon Peter in South Lebanon. Destroyed mosques, destroyed ancient ruins. In addition to their genocide in Gaza. And then once HTS came to power in Syria, within hours, Israel was bombing Syria as well, taking over huge swaths of land, including Mount Hermon, the tallest mountain in Syria. And Israel is now about 30 kilometers outside Syria. And so this is all according to plan. This is what Israel wants. It wants this greater region that it controls. And it seems like the U.S. Is part of that. But the other thing, again, that you mentioned is in Syria in particular, there is no doubt that the U.S., Israel, and other Western countries have partnered with these brutal terrorists and people we call terrorists, or did a few days ago, who chop people's heads off, who rape people, who destroyed churches in Syria, who tried to destroy the city of Malula in Syria, which is one of the last cities in the world that speaks Aramaic. I was just there 3 days ago, by the way. I just got back from Syria. And the Christians there feel terrorized and live in fear. Many Christians have left the country. So, what you learn from all this is that everything we're told about U.S. war aims in the world are actually their opposite.
So let me again
Right.
just
Well,
give a
we say
couple
we're-
of examples
Yeah.
historically over the past, I don't even 4 or 5 decades. So when we installed Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan, this very friendly, univocal oil executive, etc., his brother Waleed became the top warlord in the area dealing the opium. I'm sure that's a coinkydink. If you talk about bin Laden himself, the Mujahideen network in the 70s and 80s was cultivated by Brzezinski and the gang. They were our allies. They were our freedom fighters, etc. So we have a long history of working with quote unquote radical Islam and militant groups that we arm, fund, and really use as proxy networks. This is not new. This has been going on well before I was born, sir.
Yes, in fact, I think it was well put. The last episode of the show House of Cards, if you watched it, the president and his wife, who's the vice president, look into the camera and say, "We are the terror," and that is the truth. I mean, you could even go back to the 1930s when Britain helped create the Muslim Brotherhood to prevent secular socialists from coming to power in the Middle East. And as you say, under Carter, who's being lionized, Jimmy Carter, he's being lionized. Certainly, he was the greatest ex-president in the world. I agree with that. But when he was president, in June of 1979, with the advice of Brzezinski, as you mentioned, he started to fund the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, which one of the leaders was Osama bin Laden. And as we learn later, when I was a kid, I was being told that was being done to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan.
Rambo 3, baby.
What you learn later,
Rambo
right.
3.
But what Brzezinski, exactly.
Yeah,
right, exactly. I watched all the Rambos.
Continue.
And what Brzezinski admitted later is the U.S. supported the Mujahideen 6 months before the Soviets invaded, and they did it to draw the Soviets into Afghanistan in order to give them, in Brzezinski's words, their Vietnam.
And by the way, he
them
made that
an
admission.
intractable
He made that admission
war.
in Le Monde magazine, in a French publication. And really, again, most people ignored that. Kudos to scholars like Peter Dale Scott, who are still with us, that highlighted that. And, Peter Dale Scott actually had classes with Brzezinski at McGill University. So he sat side by side with him. It's actually in my film Invisible Empire. He talks about it. And he's also the guy that coined the term deep state and deep events in the early 80s. So, for all those conservatives that watch this show, the left has something to offer, I promise as well. And, you mentioned Jimmy Carter as the best ex-president of all time. Talk about kind of a mea culpa for the region. He writes a book, and he actually, a lot of people didn't know there was a documentary film that went with that book as well, Peace Not Apartheid, on the Israel-Palestinian situation. And he was kind of forced to lighten up on the term apartheid. But again, that is a correct term for what is going on and has been going on in that region of Israel and Palestine for some time. And again, Netanyahu is on the record saying Israel is not for everybody. We got to take another break. We're going to come back. We're going to continue to discuss the case for Palestine, why it matters, and why you should care. More making sense of the madness after this.
I couldn't give anything a higher endorsement.
I would be remiss had I not include Cardio Miracle on my very short list of secrets.
It's the real deal. It's a real product. It's not another supplement.
I'm operating about 6 to 8 hours, and I've noticed that being on this Cardio Miracle has made a huge difference.
Since I started taking Cardio Miracle, about 8 months into it, the benefits have been fantastic.
You know, if I get hungry, then I just have a Cardio Miracle.
Not only is it safe, but it's necessary to take Cardio Miracle to stay well.
This let me sleep, it's feeling like more energy, more get up and go, and it's all because of what this company does.
For me as a doctor, Cardio Miracle is a staple.
Cardio Miracle to me is hope in a glass.
To try Cardio Miracle for yourself and get a special fan discount, go to the host page right now and click the link for Cardio Miracle.
And we are back. So we kind of left off in this late 70s, early 80s era where the United States is supporting these networks in order to destabilize regions. And of course, our allies are Israel in that region. I would also argue, obviously parts of Pakistan become our allies. British intelligence is working in those networks, etc. The ISI, for interest, has a large role and will continue to have a large role. That's a whole nother show. How did we get into a situation where Israel basically gets to decide what the leadership of Palestine is going to be, Hamas? A lot of people don't understand that aspect of it. And then it doesn't really matter because they're demonized as terrorist groups. And now, the talking points are essentially everybody's a terrorist, and they're still not going to be able to maintain their own destiny or have their own real leadership, correct?
Well, so Israel certainly helped create Hamas. I mean, it does have some indigenous roots, of course, but Israel helped promote the creation of Hamas to counter the Palestinian Liberation Organization under Yasser Arafat, which was the dominant Palestinian organization in both Gaza and the West Bank. Now, with that said, Hamas does get elected by the Palestinian people in Gaza in 2006. But again, Israel essentially helped them come to power by supporting their creation. And again, very typical, like the U.S. helped create the Mujahideen, which became Al-Qaeda. Then Hamas grows into something that Israel is unhappy with, right? Because it has a mind of its own and starts actually advocating for the people of Gaza and fighting Israel. So that is really the reality. And then in the West Bank, on the other hand, you really do have the, in the Palestinian Authority, which ostensibly governs the Palestinian people in the West Bank, you have an organization that grew out of the Palestinian Liberation Organization that is now totally captive to Israel. They do Israel's bidding entirely. All the policing they do is for Israel. They, persecute their own Palestinian people, kill their own Palestinian people. They are totally captive by Israel. And that's why now the U.S. and Israel want the Palestinian Authority to be in charge of Gaza, because they are totally, puppets of Israel. Hamas, again, which grew out of support, or again, at least had substantial support from Israel in the beginning, has now decided to have its own independent, perspective and views. And so they're the ones that are now being called terrorists.
So what happens next? Because, you've had this quote unquote ceasefire. I want to see a de-escalation. I don't want war with Iran. I want the stuff with Lebanon to stop. I'd love to see stabilization in Syria as well. I don't know how real any of this is. But at the same time, Trump is talking about Gaza as beautiful beachfront property. And that's not the first time it's been discussed that way. A little guy named Jared Kushner has also discussed it in the same manner. And this is a guy that is about as tight with Netanyahu as well as you can get. And Trump has obviously, we've discussed it, been very friendly to Israel. Another thing that I wasn't in love that he did, I know, again, this was big with the evangelicals, but made Jerusalem the capital of Israel. Again, where does he get the authority to do that? But okay, whatever. I guess we're rolling with it. What's about to happen in that region? Because we have all these people that are displaced, that are total refugees. There's really nothing to come back to. What is the rebuilding process? Is this essentially going to just become a part of that quote-unquote greater Israel project, and then these other people are going to be dispersed to other places in the Middle East, possibly in the United States or other Western-friendly countries, etc.? What's actually about to happen?
So, first of all, as you say, I mean, at least the plan that Trump announced, and that Israel, by the way, the plan when it began the operations after October 7th, they explicitly said in their own plans, was to ethnically cleanse all of Gaza, to send them into the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. And now Trump is saying he wants to send at least 1 million out of, I guess, well, there were 2.3 million people in Gaza before October 7th. There's probably something short of 2 million now. Trump is saying he wants at least 1 million to be sent to Egypt and Jordan, which, by the way, is illegal. What he's talking about is ethnic cleansing. I mean, this is completely illegal to force people to move from their land and their homes, what's left of them, to other countries. And by the way, the Arab League, you probably saw this, Jason, the Arab League just put a firm statement out, unanimous statement saying they would oppose this plan of moving the Palestinians out of Gaza. At the same time, as you say, what's left of Gaza is a demolition site. In fact, maybe I'm even quoting Trump on that. That's true, what he said. It is a demolition site. There's almost nothing left. All the hospitals have been destroyed. The schools have been destroyed. The homes have been destroyed. I think it's like 1.9 million of the people in Gaza are living in tents. All of the freshwater aquifers have been poisoned or destroyed. All of the farmland has been destroyed. So what is left for these people? Not much is the truth. They're saying it would take decades just to remove the rubble in order to allow for reconstruction in Gaza. But notwithstanding that, in spite of that, you see people in Gaza marching back to the northern part of Gaza, which was supposed to be part of Israel now. That Israel said it was going to take that part of Gaza. And the Palestinian people are going back there despite the fact there's nothing left. These people will not leave there voluntarily. And honestly, I don't think they're going to be able to be forced out. So there's going to have to be found a way to reconstruct Gaza for the people of Palestine, with those people living there. And that has to be done. The West owes them that. The U.S. owes them that. Israel owes them that. Will that be done? That I couldn't tell you. I do not know the state of Gaza, what that will be in the future. But what I'm fairly certain of is that the people of Palestine that are in Gaza will stay in Gaza. And actually, that is a huge tribute to their resilience and their, courage.
So, with that being said, and the fact that you just kind of acknowledged it may take decades to move the rubble, is there any kind of a peaceful resolution here? And will the Palestinians ever know a nation state where they choose their own leaders and have their own military?
I think how this is going to play out, Jason, and again, no one knows, but the truth is, as bad as Gaza is, right, as bad off as they are, as bad off as Lebanon is, as bad off as Syria is, as bad off as the West Bank is, Israel has not come out of this unscathed. They are now an international pariah state. The vast majority of the world knows what they are now, and that is a genocidal society. And they also feel they've been defeated. All of the aims Netanyahu announced that he wanted, the destruction of Hamas, the forcible return of the hostages, not by negotiation, but, by, military means, the takeover of the northern part of Gaza, north of the Nesserine corridor. They have failed at all those things. And at the cost of many Israeli soldiers' lives, not just by being killed through battle, but also through suicide. And you have a society that is starting to turn on itself because of its own failures, but also because of the hideous, demented things that they have done to the Palestinian people. And I think they have crossed the Rubicon. In the end, I do not think Israel will survive as a single religious state. I think ultimately peace will come when there is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural state in historic Palestine, frankly, along the lines of the U.S. Constitution. And that may sound very Pollyannish. I don't think that's going to come soon, but I think that is the future. I just think you cannot have a theocracy, and that's what Israel is, that is imposed on a people that have been there for centuries. I think that the only solution now is something that looks like what we call the United States of America, where people have the right to free speech, the right to their own religion, and one person, one vote. I think that is what is going to come out of this.
I wish I could be as optimistic as you, sir, given the historical precedent. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but I've been wrong before, and that's the thing. You just never know where, I guess political hegemonies can sway. I think there's a lot of obstacles in the way of that, unfortunately, but only time will tell. Dan, let everybody know where they can get the book and support your work.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to reiterate my praise and thank you to you for having me on the show. They can find my book, of course, on Amazon. They can go to the local bookstore. If the bookstore doesn't have it, they can order it, or they can buy it directly at skyhorsepublishing.com. And they can find my commentary at Daniel M. Kavalik on Twitter.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to take a quick break. Final segment of the show after this.
Everything you're showing us, Steve, I'm looking at it going, I want one of those. I want one of those. And I think you guys are too. So don't forget to go to the Patriot TV store and you can see all of Steve's Made in America shirts and just everything. Shirts, hats, socks, sunglasses, you name it, workout gear, you've got everything.
So we're going to bring some of our other people back again to show you some of the other items.
Okay.
And we keep changing so you get a good idea of what we carry.
Yeah, I mean,
See a lot of,
exactly. Look
items.
at the variety and look at the choices you have. Today's guest again was Steve Stern of the Flagship Company. And again, they've been in business over 70 years. High quality products, fast delivery, and amazing customer service. So for any reason something doesn't fit, you can send it right back. And again, I'm going to say it one more time, the Patriot TV store. You've got to go to Patriot TV store and get your items.
And we are back. We are now joined by Paul Stone. We are going to be talking precious metals. This is an arena you've been in for some time. We've seen silver explode recently. We've seen gold really go to all-time highs under the Biden administration. There seems to be more of, I would say, economic confidence going on, not just in the United States, but globally, since Trump has won the presidency and now been sworn in. We've seen huge sways in the crypto markets, the technology space, Wall Street, etc. Where are precious metals going, and what do you expect them to do in this administration?
You know, the beauty about my experience anyway with precious metals is that gold and silver is always doing what it's supposed to be doing. That's the beauty of it. So if you have falsehood in your finances, gold and silver goes higher. If your finances are full of wholesome truths and principles and reality, then you don't need gold and silver. It's not doing much. Maybe it's creeping higher a little bit each decade and it's hardly noticeable. So the one thing in the brief time that we have together today that I would ask folks to pay attention to is, can Trump stop the bills from coming? Look, I voted for him with both hands, right? And I encourage people, even if they weren't, regularly voting for the R candidate, they were voting for the Democrat, the D candidate, to just really look at what this election was about. It was about the country. It was about us. There was finally someone who was actually talking about making things better for us. But when it comes to money and gold and silver, if you're printing money, then one day you're really going to be living in a world where you wished you had gold and silver, because the money will end up dead. So what I mean by Trump being able to stop the bills from coming, you can't, because it started in 1997 when the baby boomers retired. When you have 70 million people retire from your workforce and go on the cost side, you've got massive problems forever. You're never going to get out of that issue, that deficiency, if you will. The $36 trillion in debt, stop calling it debt. Call it the amount of money our economy did not produce meeting its costs, meaning the production level was here and costs were here. And here's the last little piece. When the government prints to pay its bills, it causes costs to go higher. So it prints more and the costs go higher, and prints more and the costs go higher. Eventually, and the dollar today is only worth 3 cents. So the buying power of the dollar, if it was a purity, it was once worth 100 cents. Today it's very impure. It's only worth 3 cents. From the printing, the artificial creation of money onto an Excel spreadsheet, and out in the world it goes. So eventually the dollar's worth 1 penny, half a penny, a tenth of a penny, a hundredth of a penny. They mechanically can and mathematically can print money forever, and the dollar could be worth 1,000th of a penny. But you would be paying $1,000 for a Starbucks. And so in that world that we're headed to, I know everyone's smart and brilliant, mostly when we think about financial leaders or Donald Trump, but this is the one thing no one's getting. You stop printing the money, you'll already wished you were in precious metals, because the correction happens back to reality. Very painful, but we could manage it. We could oversee it. We could preside over that bust. Or you print until it busts, and then no one's really prepared for it, except for listeners to shows like yours, bud. So precious metals are always going to do what they're supposed to be doing. And if they're going higher, then that's just confirming for you the issues are not going away, they're getting worse.
So, I own physical silver. It's in my weight class, if you will. And I like the 1 ounce coins. The last time I checked, and I think it was last week, somewhere around $30. I've seen it dip as low as $12. But when we talk about printing money, we never printed more than during the COVID 1984 nightmare. And we also had this massive shift in wealth away from the middle class, the lower middle class, etc. That, was an acceleration that I don't think most people really grasp. And in short order after that, we were also succumbed to inflation. Now, I want to believe Donnie T is going to be able to bring that down. But I'm still getting hammered, not only on eggs, but on gas, on my electric bill, etc., in comparison to where we were prior to the COVID 1984 nightmare. Now, also in comparison, you did see the price of those precious metals explode to where they were prior to that. With Trump talking tariffs, even hinting at a restructuring of the IRS. I thought it was all talk, but boy, he keeps talking about it. I'm not saying we're getting rid of the federal income tax, but I wouldn't be opposed. What does that mean for a hard asset class like precious metals?
Well, again, since gold and silver is not man-made, there's 21 million Bitcoin, so it's limited, but can't there be 42 million? And you can jump up and down and scream and yell at me all you want that there'll never be 42 million Bitcoin, and I won't believe you, because some man made Bitcoin. Some man or woman made it in a computer, so I know there's a possibility of it growing, which would then dilute the value of the people already in Bitcoin. That's what's happening to the dollar. So gold and silver is a truly trapped asset. It truly can't handle the demand when it comes. And in the scale of, if you want a comparable, the gold and silver marketplace, and from what I've studied, and I'm not a financial advisor or a trained economist, but I've studied the hell out of this for way over 10 years, 15, 16 years now. And there's about the precious metals marketplace around the world is about a $4 trillion marketplace. And currently the stock market's worth almost 60 trillion, I'm sorry. So $60 trillion in the markets, in the US markets, 4 trillion in gold and silver around the world. So you can see if just 10% of the stock market money, not saying anyone should sell, not giving anyone advice on what they should do, just giving a mathematical exercise. If $6 trillion ran away from one place and ran into a $4 trillion marketplace, you would cause gold and silver prices to rotate 2, 3, 4, 500 times. 500%. So it's easy to understand that the growth in gold and silver comes because money gets scared about where it once was, and it's looking for safety and security. And that's the confirmation agent, certainly gold, and you own silver. Silver does have a track record of going higher during the crisis. But gold price rising is that confirmation agent that you're continuing to head into deep, dark waters and insolvency at one point, financially speaking. And if you're in gold and silver before that happens, historically, you've preserved your wealth. And you have a heck of a chance of growing it while everyone else is crying a river of woe because they didn't do anything about it early enough.
You just kind of mentioned Wall Street and the stock markets. And we just saw an earthquake in the markets regarding NVIDIA, artificial intelligence in general, with China releasing DeepSeek. And actually, Trump has now made commentary on this, basically saying it should be a wake-up call to American companies. But at the same time, if we're about to get AI that is better and cheaper and uses less energy, this is an overall positive moving the market forward. I actually do agree with this. At the same time, the Zuck just announced this week that they're going to be building an information data center basically the size of much of Lower Manhattan in Louisiana. These graphics cards, these chips, you talk about precious metals, gold is integral in these, and we're going to be manufacturing them at a huge level. Do you think that is also going to have an impact on the price of gold? And then in general, what do you think AI is going to do to that market?
So let's say you run a big business, you yourself, you're the CEO of a giant business, 50,000 employees, 100,000 employees. What's your just take a guess generally, what do you think your number one cost is?
Geez, I would say it's energy, actually.
Or labor?
Yeah. Well, depending on what I'm paying them at this point.
Okay, but they're working here in America. So let's say you own 20 McDonald's. What do you think your number one cost is?
It would
probably
be
the employees. Yeah. It's top 1, 2, or 3.
Mm-hmm.
So what if you could get rid of them?
No, I get it. Automation is on the way, sir.
Well, it's been on the way a long time. So there's a website that's run by a great economist named John Williams, and he shows the old-fashioned ways of counting unemployment and inflation. The old-fashioned way, not the archaic, obsolete way, just the true way that unemployment was counted in this country for well over 100 years until it became a podium number and was messed around with, is 25% unemployment here in America. 25%. Now, doesn't that match up with how much money they need to print to get our bills paid, that we lose all that production? Now, this isn't retired people, 25% unemployed, people that want to be working. So automation is already replacing jobs, or they're already going overseas. So job replacement here has actually been the thing that helps, it seems, to be what causes Wall Street to enrich itself. And that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to cut costs and increase revenue as best it can. So if AI can come and literally replace all the fast food workers, all the delivery truck people, anything that you can mostly automate, a very routine job, customer service reps, all that stuff, then eventually you have more consumers that don't earn any money, that have to eat or they die, so the government has to print more to support them. You grow the government and you kill the workforce.
Well,
And
that's why I think
extremely
we really
good for
do
Golden Silver.
need to start restricting this government. I don't know what hopes I have for Doge or Elon Musk, but again, people can get involved in precious metals right now by going to colonelmetalsgroup.com. That's colonelmetalsgroup.com. Paul, we have run out of time. I want to thank you so much for joining us, and I want to thank you guys for watching this show 5 days a week here on Patriot.tv, where the truth lives. Remember, it is not about left or right. It is always about right and wrong. I'll see you on the flip side.
Vladimir Putin will remain in office until 2036.
Putin, rated R.